What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SI Sooners podcast. It's episode 6 already, Parker. We kind of didn't give recruiting its due in last week's pod, so we're going to have to rectify that today. Trust me, we got you covered. We've got updates coming on Sooner Summit, who's in, who's out, and has any college football recruit ever been more all in this case, than Caleb Williams? Big decision coming up for 4-star defensive lineman Kelvin Gilliam. That's right, I said defensive lineman. More on that in a second. Plus an absolute bombshell over the weekend out of Texas. Yeah, the Longhorns. We've got that to dive into. Plus, we did hear from Lincoln Riley on Saturday. And then today, Wednesday, we heard from defensive coordinator Alex Grinch and receivers coach Dennis Simmons, Parker.
That's right, John. And, even though you and I are still 2 hours away, give or take, from one another, it's very nice to be full screen here on the SI Sooners podcast and have a much nicer spread here featuring the soothing visuals of this lava lamp to ease the mind as we podcast. So let's get it rolling.
Absolutely. I'm John Hoover. I'm in Tulsa, as Parker referenced. That's Parker Thune. He's in Norman, and we are currently steering the fastest boat in the fleet, known as SI's College Network. That's right, SI Sooners, allsooners.com, is number one across the all 100 or so websites in the SI College Network, guys. We're number 6 overall behind some NFL websites, apparently. I know, NFL, right? But listen, obviously that makes us very proud. But most of all, we are thankful to you guys, the reader, the viewer over there on YouTube, and of course the podcast listener. We know OU fans are pretty accustomed to being ranked number 1. So yeah, you did it. Congratulations. Seriously, we like to think we do pretty good work over here at SI Sooners. But there's no doubt we could not do it without the legions of OU fans who have jumped on board this thing since we took over in March, right at the start of the pandemic. Yeah, so thank you. Okay, Parker, enough of that. We heard Monday from Caleb Williams in his weekly blog for Sports Illustrated, exclusive to SI All-American. And nobody, Parker, has ever been more all in with their verbal commitment, non-binding verbal commitment, I will remind you, than Oklahoma's 2021 5-star quarterback and his family.
Yeah, you may very well be right, John. I mean, they're moving their entire family to the OKC area to be closer to Caleb and get the opportunity to watch him play collegiate football for the Sooners here in Norman. And, you mentioned it. They are so all in, and they've demonstrated that over and over and over again ever since Caleb committed on the 4th of July. They're going to come down here this weekend, look at houses, look at apartments. And, of course, Caleb has gone out and organized the Sooner Summit, which we'll talk more about in a moment. But, yeah, Caleb Williams is very obviously in it for the long haul here at Oklahoma. His commitment is by no means in jeopardy. Not that was ever a question, I don't think, in anyone's mind. He's got a very tight bond with Lincoln Riley, and he's really, really excited to change the culture and take Oklahoma over the top and make them a national championship team because they've been so close for so long, John. And there are just a couple pieces here and there that it seems like the Sooners are missing year in and year out. And Caleb Williams, yeah, he's bringing his phenomenal arm and his phenomenal talents to Norman, but he's also doing his best to make sure that those pieces that the Sooners had been missing in years past won't be missing once he takes the helm.
Yeah, he's working really hard to recruit guys on the defense, on the offensive line. To be clear, just so people don't misunderstand what you said when you said change the culture, we're talking about national championships versus Big 12 championships and playoff appearances. That's what you're talking about. By changing the culture, taking it to the next level. I got to thinking today, I don't know why, the thought jumped into my head when Baker Mayfield, Parker, comes to Norman, or when Kyler Murray comes to Norman. I'm sorry, this is funny to me. Do you think that they avoid Alex Grinch because, meeting him or seeing him, shaking his hand, talking to him, because it just makes them sad? Because they had teams that were absolutely loaded. They've got guys all through the NFL off of those two teams, 2017 and 2018. And the best they could do was getting into the first round of the playoff. You think maybe they kind of avoid that because it just makes them sad, Parker?
I mean, definitely. And, you think back to that 2017 team in particular, I would posit that that's one of the most talented teams that college football has ever seen, at least over the last 2 or 3 decades. And they very much were the stuff of national national championship legend. That was a team that could very well have gone to the big stage and gone and beaten Alabama for a national championship. It didn't break their way due to shoddy defense, but Baker Mayfield and that offense, I mean, you're talking about one of the most stacked units of all time back in 2017, and it's really a similar story with Kyler Murray in 2018. So, yes, to sum it all up, John, Oklahoma has been very, very close. And generally speaking, I think the consensus among Sooner fans is that it's the play of the secondary. It's a couple pieces here and there on defense because the offense under Lincoln Riley has been nothing short of spectacular ever since he arrived here in Norman. But the defense has had its share of difficulties, had its share of shortcomings, and that's why Caleb Williams has placed a particular emphasis, and we'll talk about this more later, but he's placed a particular emphasis not on recruiting offensive pieces, but on recruiting defensive pieces, because he knows that Lincoln Riley's going to get his.
Now, I will tell you, we record this here on a Wednesday, okay? I will tell you who's in Norman for Sooner Summit right now. It's Caleb Williams' mom. She actually came yesterday, Tuesday, and she's apartment hunting, house hunting, not for Caleb. He's going to do the freshman thing and live in, Headington Hall and be part of the team and all that. He's going to have a roommate, But during his conversation with John Garcia from Sports Illustrated All-American, Caleb was describing to John, my mom's going to look for a house or an apartment, a rent house or an apartment that they can live in for 2 or 3 years. Mom and dad can live in for 2 or 3 years. That has a pool, so we can get the offensive line over and have pool parties and relax and float around. That has a grill, so we can get on the grill and have fun with the guys, grilling up some meat. My dad can cook. I mean, this thing is it's not like, well, we might do this, well, we might do that. Parker, they've got plans to move the family, as you said, to reestablish themselves in Norman, Oklahoma. And all that's left unsaid or unknown at this point is who he's going to bring to the Sooner Summit. I know those guys are having dinner on Saturday night, but who's he going to bring? Who's in, who's out, Parker?
Yeah, and that's kind of unclear right now, John. Caleb didn't name any names on Monday morning when he released his blog and correspondence with John Garcia at Sports Illustrated All-American. You can check that out on our site, SISoonersAllSooners.com, if you want to take a look at Caleb's own account of what Sooner Summit is going to look like. But no, Caleb was really cryptic about who's coming, who's not coming. I did speak to both Damon Harmon and Kelvin Gilliam, the two Highland Springs kids. Of course, Damon's committed. Kelvin's going to commit this Saturday. We don't know whether it's going to be to Oklahoma, to Penn State, or South Carolina, but he will make that decision on Saturday. Now, both those guys will be staying home in Virginia for Kelvin Gilliam's announcement, so they're out. If we triangulate some reports here, John, it's pretty easy to peg Tristan Lay as one of the guys that's going to be in Norman for the Sooner Summit, and that's big. Like, let's just stop right there and acknowledge that Tristan Lay would be a huge addition for the Sooners if Caleb Williams can talk him into joining this coalition of DMV area recruits that he's doing his best to assemble in Norman. Tristan Lay would be the Sooners' highest-rated offensive line recruit ever. And think about this, John. We've seen what Bill Bedenbaugh can do with solid, albeit unspectacular recruits, how he's able to develop them and turn them into NFL-caliber talent. How much more so can he turn Tristan Lee into an even bigger stud just by virtue of the talent that already exists there? Tristan Lee, I get so confused, John. Some of the analysts call him Lay, some call him Lee. Kelvin Gilliam, I go with what he said. He said he pronounced it Tristan Lay, so that's what we're going to go with for now. But Tristan Lay is widely considered one of the top 20 prospects in America, easily the top prospect in the state of Virginia, and one of the best offensive line prospects of the last several years. He would be, I would say, the biggest addition among the guys that have a realistic shot of coming to Oklahoma right now. We don't really know where Emeka Egbuka stands, but it kind of looks unlikely at this point. That could change. But out of the guys that have a realistic shot of committing to Oklahoma, Tristan Lay has got to be number one on the priority list for both Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley, and Bill Bedenbaugh, for that matter.
Let's call him Lay from here on. That works for me. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, we're going to dive a little deeper into the world of recruiting. Parker's had some really interesting conversations. We referenced one earlier with some recruits who have their big announcements coming up. Trust me when I say this, really compelling stuff. Plus, is Texas really back? Hey, are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman or a car dealership in Oklahoma City or a restaurant in Edmond. Or maybe you're a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise and you just want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Well, then consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day. And the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at all_Sooners. Social media time. You guys can follow SI Sooners on Twitter at all_Sooners. Find Parker at Parker Thune, simple enough, Thune. And I'm going on almost 10 years now. I think I might have just passed 10 years on Twitter at John E. Hoover. Parker's also on Instagram at Parker Thune, and I'm on Facebook at John E. Hoover Media. And when you're not watching videos at SI Sooners, if you're an OU fan, you should probably check out all the OU videos I post over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. Quick search, easy peasy, I pop right up. Okay, Parker, here we go. Let's start south of the Red River first. Tom Herman has a commitment from the greatest quarterback in the history of quarterbacks, better than Peyton Manning was in college, better than Tom Brady was in the pros, better than, Shane Falco or Paul Crewe was in Hollywood. Quinn Ewers is committed to Texas. Parker, is Texas back?
Oh, let's pump the brakes here, John. Come on now. Come on now. It's no secret that Texas has been able to recruit over the last decade. If they've done nothing else, they've recruited well. And that's what makes the last decade or so of Longhorn football that much more disappointing, is because they've consistently recruited better than any other program in the Big 12. They just haven't done anything with it. And so, yes, you mentioned Quinn Ewers, the sixth player in history to receive a perfect 1,000 rating from 24/7 Sports composite metric. So this guy's a big deal. And everybody, whether in the DFW area or outside, acknowledges that this guy is likely the best quarterback prospect to come out of South Lake Carroll for sure, maybe the best quarterback prospect to come out of the state of Texas, and some would argue the best quarterback prospect in history.
That's a mouthful.
It sure is. But yeah, Quinn Ewers carries a lot of hype. Now, is that hype entirely justified? I'm not sure. I think we need to see another year of him to figure out whether he's really all that. But the numbers as a sophomore for him at South Lake Carroll High School, undoubtedly impressive. 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's got a phenomenal arm and an ability to throw on the run, off balance. He demonstrates a lot of the tools that are to be desired in a quarterback in the year 2020 because, let's call it like it is, John, you got to be mobile and able to create and get outside the pocket and make a play when the pocket collapses. And Quinn Ewers has that capacity. He's not a dual threat guy by any means, but he has mobility and he's got a phenomenal arm. Now, he commits to Texas really out of the blue last Friday afternoon. And I think everybody was a little shocked by that because, with the kind of prestige that a guy like that carries, he generally will wait till his junior or senior year before he pulls the trigger. Quinn Ewers is just a rising junior at South Lake Carroll, so he's got 2 full years of prep ball left to play. Now, I will say, I don't know how solid of a commitment this is. I quite frankly would not be surprised if we saw Quinn Ewers decommit down the line, but let's hypothesize and let's posit for the moment that he stays committed to Texas. That Red River Showdown, John, is going to be a ton of fun circa 2023 when you got Caleb Williams on one side, Quinn Ewers on the other, the 2 best quarterback prospects of the 2021 and 22 classes respectively, just going at it. That's going to be a firefight, and I'm excited.
That's pretty cool. Good way of looking at it. I have an insider, a friend of mine who is inside the Carroll program, the South Lake Carroll program, and he tells me that this kid is head and shoulders far and away better than anybody that they've produced, and that includes Chase Daniel, that includes Riley Dodge, all those guys. All those guys. Think about that. As I said, That's a mouthful in itself. Question is, did Tom Herman save his job? Not that he's on the hot seat potentially, but in other words, does getting a commit from this basically 6-star quarterback 2 years down the line, does that ensure that Tom Herman won't possibly be fired until 2023 or 2024 at the earliest?
Well, I don't think Texas wants to pay out additional money to another coach that isn't actually roaming the sidelines for them. They've been down that path before.
They don't mind doing that, though. They don't mind throwing bad money after good.
Oh, man. It'll be interesting to see whether Herman can stick around. But, I mean, let's give the guy his due. He's recruited well. And that is obviously continuing as you look at their 21 class and their 22 class, of which Ewers is the centerpiece at this point. And so Herman's set up, like he's got all the pieces there to have a very competitive program in the very near future. I mean, not only do you have Ewers coming down the chute in 2022, but he had 2 of the top 3 dual-threat quarterback commits in the 2020 class in Hudson Card and Jaquindon Jackson. They're both true freshmen at the University of Texas. So you look at it now, Sam Ehlinger has 1 year before he's out the door. Well, with the NCAA's decision today, maybe 2. But the point is, this is Hudson Card's team, presumably, in 2021, maybe 22, and then you got Quinn Ewers coming down the line. And so, at least as far as the quarterback position is concerned, the Longhorns really have a logjam. I mean, that's the reason that Jalen Milroe got out of town as soon as Ewers committed, because there was no foreseeable path to playing time for him.
And he flipped to Alabama. Pretty good fallback plan there for him.
Yeah, and Alabama gets their quarterback in that 21 class, which was long overdue. Obviously, Drake May was committed to Alabama for quite a while before flipping to North Carolina. There were rumors circulating that Luke Altmaier, whom I watched at the Elite 11 and really, really liked, was going to flip from Florida State to Alabama. Doesn't look like that's going to come to fruition. So Milroe to Alabama is a nice addition for Saban. Look, they've got Bryce Young in the 2020 class. This is his team for as long as he's there. But to have Milroe waiting in the wings is the kind of thing that you want if you're a program like Alabama, because having 2 quarterbacks at their disposal has paid off in the past. See 2017.
Absolutely. Let's be honest with this now. Lincoln Riley, he's had the number 1 quarterback in the 2019 class. He's going to get the number 1 quarterback in the 2021 class. It might be a little early in his career, but I think you see a pattern that is starting to emerge behind the guys coming in and transferring and winning the job. You get the man in the nation, the guy, every 2 years. I think that's spaced out enough that everybody gets to play. Everybody goes to the NFL, and down the line, basically everybody else wants to come play for you. And every other year, somebody else can have that number 1 ranked quarterback. What do you think about that plan, Parker?
I mean, that's about as solid a foundation for an offensive juggernaut that you can have. And yeah, Lincoln Riley, not only does he have top-of-the-line talent, but he's got depth. I mean, Chandler Morris went to the Elite 11. He was a 4-star prospect among the best quarterback recruits in the nation. He comes in this 2020 class, and much like the situation that Jalen Milroe would have been in at Texas, Chandler Morris really doesn't have a path to playing time at Oklahoma. That's how deep they are.
Should be fun to watch. Parker, you had a very interesting, fascinating, really, conversation with Kelvin Gilliam, the big defensive lineman from the DMV area, and I call him a lineman because he said he's talked with Calvin Thibodeau about playing multiple positions across the OU front. Not just one, not just the 3 technique, not just the 6 technique. He wants to play multiple positions and be available. Can you tell us about your conversation and his big announcement coming up on August 22nd? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so Kelvin has emphasized time and time again, John, that just because his best friend Damon Harmon committed to Oklahoma does not mean he's following suit. That said, I think Sooner Nation should be very encouraged with where they sit heading into this weekend and Kelvin Gilliam's announcement, especially given that Marcus Burris committed to Texas A&M last Saturday. I firmly believe that the Sooners eased off their pursuit of Burris because they maybe knew that they were in a good position to land Gilliam. And as you mentioned, John, the Sooners are making a point to recruit versatile defenders, both on the defensive line and in the defensive backfield. And Gilliam is a versatile guy. He's a guy that right now is a defensive end, but projects more as a defensive tackle if he bulks up heading into college. And you can put him all over the line. He kind of fits the mold of like a Jalen Redmond, for instance. And so as I look at what the Sooners want from Kelvin Gilliam and how he fits into their scheme and how he fits into their vision, as well as what he's expressed to me, the kind of vision that he's looking for, it's a real natural match in my mind for him to come to Oklahoma.
And folks, by the way, all this content, all these interviews, all these videos, you know where to find them. SI Sooners, allsooners.com, including an upcoming conversation that Parker has had with Jacob Sexton. Parker, what can you shed about that conversation?
Yeah, so John, as some of our readers will know, I've kept close tabs on the top 3 Oklahoma prospects for the class of 2022. Gentry Williams out of Booker T. Washington and Tulsa, Talon Shetron, Edmond Santa Fe, and then Jacob Sexton of Edmond Deer Creek. Sexton, big offensive lineman, 6'5", 285 pounds, 4-star guy. Shetron is obviously a wideout, considered by some to be the top wideout across the country in the 2022 class. And then Williams, a 5-star who can play either quarterback or defensive back, which is a real unique combination. And when I talked to him a couple months back, he emphasized that his ability to play both of those positions is really beneficial to him as a player, because as a quarterback, having the mindset of a defensive back helps him read defenses better, and as a defensive back, knowing what's going through a quarterback's head helps him play defense better. But in terms of the conversation that I had with Sexton, he's really excited for the potential of high school football in 2020, and obviously we don't know whether that's a sure thing or not at this point. So much can change in such a short amount of time, as has become evident. But Sexton told me that he's really been emphasizing his improved pass protection, and he said he's a natural run blocker, but he views pass protection as something of a weakness in his game, and he wants to refine those skills before he takes his talents to the collegiate level. And so in terms of where he's leaning, I straight up asked him if he was leaning one way or another. He said at this point in time, he's keeping all his options open, seeing where this fall goes, and then he'll start to look at committing more seriously.
There you have it. Parker Thune killing it on recruiting for SI Sooners, allsooners.com. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, we're going to get into some Zoom calls. What did Lincoln Riley say about his quarterbacks? What did Alex Grinch say about his linebackers? And what did Dennis Simmons say about his wide receivers?
Hey there, loyal listeners. Parker Thune here with SI Sooners. Are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond. Or maybe you're just a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Twitter at @all_Sooners.
The SI Sooners podcast rolls on, and we have teased you with a glimpse into the future that gives, you only get from recruiting, right? But now we got to get back into the present. Parker referenced it earlier in the podcast. News came out today that the NCAA Division I Council has voted to allow fall sports student athletes to compete in any amount of games this year. Any amount. And get this, it will not count against their year of eligibility. What now? What in the world? This first reported by Yahoo Sports. Still needs to be approved by the NCAA Board of Governors when they meet on Friday. But my gosh, where did this come from? You talk about an altruistic turn by the NCAA from heavy-handed and tone-deaf to, oh, you poor kids, you want to play during a pandemic? Okay, everybody gets a year of eligibility added. Unreal, Parker.
Well, John, at this point, I think the NCAA is starting to sense their amateurism model crumbling and are willing to take any measure to try and save it, or at least patch it up for the time being. And so I think that's what this move is rooted in, is the fact that they want to avoid any conversations about the FBS becoming entirely its own separate entity, or about college athletes unionizing or receiving some form of compensation. I feel like it's just a way for them to appease all of the athletes that have expressed dissatisfaction with the way that the NCAA has handled the pandemic and its effect on the 2020 season. And so for me, they're just kind of kicking the can down the road, and it's nice of them to let this happen, and the athletes, I'm sure, appreciate it. And it's kind of a way to hedge your bets and make sure that nobody is too furious, because obviously you got some football conferences playing in the spring, you got some still trying to play in the fall. And so they're just trying to cover all their bases at this point, is what it looks like to me.
It's pretty crazy. Another quick item before we wrap it up. Mark Blaudschen, a longtime college football reporter for the Boston Globe, he retired and he started a little venture called TMG, the Media Guys, with Tony Barnhart, Chris DeFresny, and Hoops Weiss, and some other guys. Well, they fall under the Sports Illustrated Maven umbrella now, and Mark reported today that OU, get this, has leaned against its Big 12 brethren, is the way he phrased it, in not wanting to play sports this fall. That Oklahoma was basically going along to get along, but they would play amid a dissenting vote, or almost maybe like a silent protest. Well, of course, I saw that, and I immediately fired off some text messages, reached out to multiple OU sources, and yeah, it turns out that that's not exactly true. In fact, it's actually 180 degrees counter to everything that we've been hearing out of Norman, that OU really does, in fact, want to play. My sources reminded me that OU just today held a 2-hour staff meeting, everybody on board, just today, to go over stadium procedures on game day. So that's where OU is leaning, just to be 100% clear. Okay, Parker, we'll get to today's press conferences with Alex Grinch and Dennis Simmons in just a minute. But first, what stood out to you from Saturday's Zoom call with Lincoln Riley?
Well, I think a lot of people, John, were very concerned to hear that the Sooners had 9 positive COVID-19 cases after the players had been given 5 days off. Because, granted, Lincoln Riley was kind of in between a rock and a hard place when he made the decision to give his players time off, because it wasn't clear at that point whether the NCAA and whether the Big 12 Conference were going to proceed with a fall football season. And so I think in some sense he wanted to get his players out of the building to prepare for what might have ended up being a cancellation of their 2020 season. But at the same time, John, it's become really, really clear that these players are safest and most immune from the COVID-19 virus when they're on campus in whatever semblance of a bubble the university and the athletic program can provide for them. And so, honestly, I think the public perception, John, of this whole ordeal was, well, what did you expect sending these guys off campus? Like, you had, at some level, you had to expect that some of these guys were going to come back positive. And Riley did state that over 75% of his team stayed local in Norman. We don't know how many of those positive cases came from players that traveled outside of Norman. But it's really a big step backwards, John, because the Sooners hadn't had a positive case since July 1st. And then all of a sudden, send the players away for 5 days, you got 9 of them. So, if anything, John, I think what this does is it provides a lot more credence to the notion that these athletes are safest when they are on campus.
Yeah,
and
Lincoln,
within the confines of their athletic program.
100% agreed. Lincoln mentioned several times, this is not the NBA. We don't have these guys in a quote-unquote bubble. He said that all 9 of the infections were community-based infections, meaning they didn't get it from on campus. They didn't get it from each other. Somebody got, you know what I mean? Somebody went out and got it, went to a nightclub or went home for the weekend or whatever it was and got it that way. I was fascinated by his... I was one of those ones when he told us, or when the press release came out that OU 2 Fridays ago had a positive test, had 1 positive for the first time in a month, and that he was cutting them loose. My first reaction was, well, that's dumb. You don't want to cut these guys loose during a pandemic. They're going to come back. You're going to have positives. I was right. They're going to come back and have positives, but I was wrong. It might not be dumb because, frankly, Lincoln, I thought he summed it up pretty well when he said, do I regret turning them loose? He didn't actually say, yes, I do regret it. He just jumped over to the next, jumped across that chasm there and said, I would regret it not turning them loose, having them cooped up here for 7 straight weeks before the first game. Can you imagine a training camp of 7 straight weeks? You go from July 1st to September 12th, and that's your. I mean, that would not work. That would not work, and that's not practice. That's including the off-season workouts, the stuff that they were doing. You know, the OTAs that he referenced. If you guys want to watch video of Lincoln or Grinch or Simmons, you know where to do it. SI Sooners, allsooners.com. If I'm not mistaken, it's the #1 college website in the SI network. I'm just saying, we're doing some good work over here, and you guys are supporting us, so we appreciate it. Or if you want to watch those videos, hit up my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. Don't forget to follow SI Sooners, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Now, the column I wrote Saturday after Lincoln's presser, Parker, was about quarterbacks, and he referenced all 3 guys, even though I only asked about Spencer. He said, I asked him how they were stepping up into, what is presumed to be what a quarterback is supposed to step up into a leadership role. New quarterback, right? New job. You got to be a leader. Well, how the heck are they supposed to lead when they don't even know if they're having a game, or they don't even know if practice is on or off? The next day, he was talking about like the next day, we didn't know if we were having practice. Going to bed at 8 o'clock at night. We don't know in the morning if we're having practice or not. How's a quarterback supposed to lead during this unprecedented situation, or, as I like to say, during these uncertain times? I thought his response was interesting. What did you think about that, Parker?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good point, John, but at the same time, how does anybody deal with a global pandemic and the havoc that it's wreaked on the sports world? The reality is everything's in limbo all the time, and that's just kind of further evidence of that. And I get it. I get that quarterbacks, in order to function as the natural leader of the offense and potentially the team, have to be able to take some sort of leadership. But also, we're just at a point in time here in 2020 where nothing's a sure thing, at least in the long term. And so everybody kind of has to adapt and be willing to be flexible. And I'll loop in what Alex Grinch said today in his presser, John, which is that he said that the team has, on the whole, done a very good job of blocking out the circumstances and shoving that down in the back of their minds to make sure that they're preparing for their 2020 season and getting ready and hitting the weight room hard and building a brotherhood with one another. He said they've done a great job of setting aside all of the circumstances and just focusing on football. Or to quote Jalen Hurts here, John, to keep the main thing the main thing. And if Grinch says it, I mean, Grinch is a straight shooter. I'll take his word for it on that.
God, I thought we'd never hear those words again, Parker. Thank you so much for bringing that back. Now, you mentioned Alex Grinch today. Dennis Simmons also talked to the press. So I jotted down some notes on Grinch. But first, Parker, I want to get what your takeaways were on Dennis Simmons' presser.
Yeah, well, Simmons was very complimentary of his entire wide receiver room. He's obviously the outside wide receivers coach, associate head coach, but he mainly focuses on coaching up the wide receivers. And he got an interesting group this year, John. The Sooners lose CeeDee Lamb. They lose Nick Basquin, A.D. Miller, and Lee Morris. So you lose a lot of experience. 3 of those guys were fifth years or beyond. And then obviously CeeDee Lamb, although he was just a junior, was the most productive receiver that the Sooners have had in a long time. So you lose several key cogs in that wide receiver room. But what Simmons emphasized was that the transfers, Theo Howard and Obi Obialo, have not only flashed their potential, but they've also been great mentors to the younger guys. He said, and this is a direct quote here, all of them want to be the guy. And in a room where you've got 3 top recruits in that 2019 cycle, if you recall, Jaden Hazelwood, Theo Weiss, and Trajan Bridges. Of course, Hazelwood is rehabbing, but you still got 3 guys right there with a very, very high ceiling. Charleston Rambo, some are touting him as a first-round pick in next year's NFL draft. There's a lot of talent in that room, and what Simmons said was, hey, it doesn't really matter that we lost CeeDee Lamb. We've got very significant depth at wide receiver, and it's better in this day and age when anybody can catch the virus at any point and have to go into quarantine and potentially miss a couple of games. It's much better to be deep with talent than to have one guy that's just out of this world. because you never know what the next day is going to bring. And so to have 6 or 7 guys in that wide receiver room that can contribute meaningfully and make plays as a target for Spencer Rattler. Dennis Simmons said that he's very, very pleased with how that room has come along and where they stack up heading into the 2020 season.
I've always thought football, offensive football and explosive offensive football was better if you had a go-to guy at a receiver. If you had a 1,000-yard receiver that you knew every time, no matter who it was, you can name the names of the last 5 or 10 years, 15 years from the Sooners. Certainly, they've had that kind of go-to guy every year. When they haven't, when they've just said, yeah, we got good depth, you've seen the offense kind of tail off a little bit. A lot of that is quarterback-driven, of course. But I want to get to some Alex Grinch stuff. Guy was just a freaking quote machine today. Just wow, Alex Grinch. He talked about the euphoria of returning to practice. I got my notes here. Euphoria of returning to practice. How many defensive coordinators use the word euphoria? He was asked about Caleb Kelly. He said it makes you sick to your stomach, and that in 2 years in a row now, nobody deserves that. I thought that was pretty profound. He got a good question about Trey Norwood, and he said exactly what we've been thinking all offseason. Oh, yeah, remember this guy? I mean, that's exactly what we've been thinking. Who's going to start at this position? And then, boom, you forget about Trey Norwood, who was hurt all of last year. He was going to be a starter before last season. He said that Trey could probably, and I love this, compete for time at any of the 5 positions in the secondary. Think about that. Either corner, either safety, or the nickel. The Sooners had a scrimmage on yesterday, and Grinch said the tackling, of course, was very poor. He said, then you remember that it had been 8 months since they've been on the field. And he said, you don't want to make excuses, but 8 months is 8 months. He said he did enjoy the film, which I thought was interesting, except for this one screen pass that he said kept me up late last night. I asked him about the potential movement at linebacker with Caleb Kelly out. He said it's kind of like that at several positions. COVID and positive tests and quarantines coming up, likely. It means a lot of guys are going to have to be ready to do a lot of jobs this year. He said this. He said linebackers to edge rushers to defensive tackle, corners to safety, safeties to nickel, nickels to corner. And then he said the final game was a nice reminder. And I kind of looked at my phone, my computer. I'm like, And he's talking about to teach guys moving forward in 2020. Listen to this podcast on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or just go to our website, allsooners.com, and click on the player. Listen on either your smartphone or your computer, whatever. It's all there. And if you're more of a visual learner, you know what to do. Check out the video version over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. For Parker Thune, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.